Tantra Illuminated with Dr. Christopher Wallace is a journey through the depths of the human experience, as viewed through the lens of the tradition called Nondual Shaiva Tantra. This multi-format podcast delves into the fascinating world of classical Tantra and its intersections with philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, human development, and the broader world of spirituality. This is a solo episode on the topic, what you need to know to actualize the goal of the spiritual path. And the recording you're about to hear is excerpted from a live satsang. So it's a completely extemporaneous talk. So you'll certainly hear more stutters and ums than you might be used to hearing from me. But this talk ended up being quite wonderful, I think, as a encapsulation of, as the title says, what you need to know to actualize the goal of the spiritual path, with specific reference, of course, to that version of the spiritual path we call Nondual Shaiva Tantra. So I make reference to Abhinavagupta's teachings on this topic. And the whole point of this excerpt is to communicate a coherent vision of how spiritual practice works and how it doesn't, both in general and in the tantric path in particular. So even though it's an unpolished, extemporaneous talk and an imperfect recording, I felt it was important to share it with all of you because it really has quite a few gems and also really clarifies the nature of the spiritual path and uproots, hopefully, some of the common misunderstandings that people have about how it works. So I hope you listen and enjoy. Okay. So there are many different lineages within Tantric Shaivism, many sampradayas. A sampradaya is a group of interrelated lineages. And so the tradition, if you try to look at all of it, the tradition is incredibly complex with countless different teachings, countless different practices, and the teachings in some lineages even contradict each other. But that doesn't mean that one is necessarily right and one is necessarily wrong, because each lineage, or rather sampradaya, lineage grouping, seeks to present an internally coherent system of practice and view. Okay, so again, each sampradaya or lineage grouping seeks to present an internally coherent system of view and practice. And most of them succeeded at doing that. But it may appear that one system contradicts another just because they are coming at things from a bit of a different angle, okay? But my teaching and that of many others who are teaching the subject in the world today draws upon a specific sampradaya, which is, if you want to define it in specific terms, it's the synthesis of two earlier sampradayas, right? The Trika and the Krama. So there's a Trika Krama synthesis that came about at the time of the great tantric master Abhinavagupta. And that's why Abhinavagupta gets so much emphasis in the teaching of Nondual Shaiva Tantra today, because he was the first to truly articulate this synthesis of two previously separate sampradayas, the trika and the krama. Okay. Now you don't need to know these details. I'm just saying for those who are interested. So when I teach, I draw on uh, Abhinavagupta's great wisdom as my anchor point, and other teachers out there do the same. But it might, in some places, seem to contradict, or at least seem to be different from what teachers in other sampradayas are teaching, such as Sri Vidya and others. Okay, so here's the key then that I want to present. That little intro aside, Abhinavagupta argued, and not just him, but the entire lineage after him argued that awakening, realization, liberation does not happen on the basis of taking the right actions, doing the right practices, finding the right magic bullet, but rather is a shift in perspective, a fundamental shift in perspective where ignorance falls away and truth is automatically revealed. So then there's nothing that needs to be learned or believed. Rather, the goal in this system is to do whatever is necessary to allow ignorance to fall away, because then truth is automatically revealed. When we say truth here, we're talking about non-conceptual, direct seeing of the nature of reality, which is nothing to do with belief, nothing to do with thought. Okay? So for that to occur, we need ignorance to fall away. Ignorance is here defined as beliefs, especially distorting beliefs. Well, they're all distorting, but some are more distorting than others. Okay, the beliefs that are minimally distorting we call view, the view of the tradition, the philosophy of the tradition, darshana in Sanskrit. Okay, those are the minimally distorting beliefs, but all beliefs are distorting, right? So we need ignorance to fall away in however many stages, so that we can be immersed in clear seeing no matter the context. Okay, for some of you, it's easy to be immersed in clear seeing, or at least one facet of clear seeing, when on retreat in a meditative space, when it's hard to be immersed in clear seeing in the midst of everyday life. So if that's the case, then awakening has not yet really occurred. Okay, because it's not conditional. So for this unconditional awakening, we need ignorance to fall away more thoroughly and completely. Okay, so Abhinavagupta clearly says then, and again, he's at the fountainhead of a subsequent 1,000 years of tradition, and he clearly says the only thing that we're seeking is clear seeing, and for that, the only thing that's needed is the falling away of ignorance. Okay, so how does this going to happen? Well, it's going to happen in two ways. There's a two-pronged approach. Okay, on the one hand, your teachers try to point towards reality with their words, and they can only fail. They can only fail to perfectly point towards reality. And yet, by some miracle that we call grace, at any moment when listening to the pointers, you might suddenly see. And we call them pointers because, it's a metaphor. It's as if somebody's pointing out, oh, do you see the bird in that tree over there? And you're looking and looking, you don't see, and then all at once you do. And when you all at once see, there's also a physiological response that takes place. If you're looking hard and then you see, ah, there's a there's a wonder, and there's a relaxation also. The straining is done. And that is the case when you see reality clearly, and it's not actually a one and done thing because there's ever deepening seeing possible. But when you see reality clearly, there's both wonder and relaxation. The straining is done, the striving is done. Okay. So that's one strategy then. And Abhinavagupta engages this strategy in chapter 2 of his Tantra Loka and also chapter 2 of his Tantra Sara, where he just attempts to do some direct pointing, and you either get it or you don't. He says that you either get it or you don't. If you don't, keep reading. Come back to this, try it again some other time, right? But get it. What do we mean by get it? We don't mean understand the words being said. We don't mean formulate concepts that correspond to the words being said. That's not getting it. Mentally getting it is not getting it at all. Okay. So these pointing out instructions, as they're often called, which are given in Dzogchen, in Mahamudra, and in Tantric Shaivism, of the non-dual version of Tantric Shaivism, these pointing out instructions simply attempt to help you see where to look, as it were. Everything's a metaphor on this level because there's no where. But they attempt to help you look deeper into your own experience, your direct experience prior to thought, such that there's a recognition, such that what is always already the case is suddenly revealed. Another metaphor that's sometimes used is it's like you're looking through a window into a scene beyond, and you're studying the scene, and all at once your eyes refocus on the pane of glass, and you see your own reflection in the pane of glass, and you recognize yourself. That's just a metaphor. That's just a metaphor, right? But it's kind of like that, right? That the pointing out instruction seeks to help you recognize what's already present but is overlooked. Right? Okay, strategy number 2, because I said it's a two-pronged approach. Strategy number 2, Abhinavagupta calls Vikalpa Samskara. Vikalpa Samskara means refining understanding. So until you can directly see what is from a simple pointing out instruction, you keep refining your understanding. Why? Why would you bother to do that? Because Abhinavagupta argues it is easier for ignorance to fall away when it more closely resembles reality. That is to say, if you are lost, as most people are, in a complex mind world that has very little relationship to reality as such, then it is harder to escape that world. Okay. So if somebody's completely lost in a mind-created world that has very little touch points to reality as such, we call that insanity. But this tradition says almost everyone is insane. It's just that they're functionally insane, right? We reserve in our society, I mean, the term insanity for those who are in the same condition as everyone else, but not functionally so. Okay. But almost everyone, is a high functioning insane person because they're lost in a mind world which has few touch points to reality. Well, the mind world has no touch points actually to reality itself. It just sometimes can approach reality more or less well, but it never quite touches it. So Abhinavagupta says then that through Vikalpa Samskara, the word samskara here in the sense of refining, not in the sense of impressions of past experiences. That's a completely different usage of the word, a homonym. So refining understanding, vikalpa samskara, such that understanding becomes more and more and more transparent to transcendence, as it were. It never becomes completely transparent, so it still needs to fall away. it still needs to fall away, but it's easier when it's not this kind of Baroque fortress of misunderstanding. Okay. Now, there's a danger in this approach, a very significant danger, which is that if your understanding gets very well refined, then you might mistake it for realization. Now, from the standpoint of actual realization, such a mistake is absurd. It is laughable, right? But before you've had that perceptual shift, nonetheless, the mistake can occur. And this indeed was where I was stuck for many years. I had very refined understanding of this tradition and of the spiritual path. And I didn't see that was not in any way clear seeing, that it was nothing but a mental model of some of the insights that spontaneously arise in clear seeing. So a turning point for me was when I sat with Adyashanti on retreat many, many years ago. And he shared how if you understand the spiritual teachings very well, then you feel good. The spiritual teachings make you feel good. Believing the spiritual teachings to be more accurate makes you feel good. And you might mistake that good feeling you get from believing the spiritual teachings for true bliss. You might mistake your refined understanding for realization, and you might mistake the good feeling that comes from it for true bliss. And I was sort of thunderstruck. I was like, uh-oh. Right? So I went up to the microphone as on his retreats. He would have, opportunity to ask questions. And I said, actually, I've spent years, years and years and years learning Sanskrit and studying philosophy and refining my understanding as my full-time job. And I experience the pleasure that comes from those refined thoughts. What do I do? Because I don't know. And he said, well, you're gonna have to spend some time without any of the techniques you've learned, without any study, without any inhabiting the mental constructs based on the spiritual teachings, and see where you're really at. And I was humbled, and it was, I think, in that retreat or in a subsequent retreat that I resolved to completely open myself, to start from beginner's mind. I know nothing, and I am just open. I am open to transmission. And that's when the miracle began for me, from my perspective, right? Okay, so I was incredibly lucky because most people I know who developed refined understanding, they hide out in their understanding for the rest of their lives. And it's even worse if your livelihood gets tied up in that refined understanding. Then you're sort of disincentivized to go beyond your own understanding, to be humbled out of your own understanding. Okay. So that is the danger, the caveat here to this process of refining understanding, right? But Abhinavagupta rightly says, until you can simply see when the pointing out instruction is given, there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else you could possibly do on the spiritual path that would avail of anything. And now here people say, okay, wait a second, wait a second. What about all these yogic practices? What about, working in the energy body, the subtle body, working with chakras and nadis and stuff? What about these visualizations of deities? What about all that stuff that Tantra presents? That's where Abhinavagupta's master stroke comes in. He says, guess what? That is all refining understanding. That's what it actually is. How else would it work? By what mechanism could these yogic practices accomplish the already accomplished goal? Ask someone if somebody says, if some teacher says, oh, through these yogic practices, you will attain enlightenment. Ask them how, by what mechanism would that work? How would these practices bring about this state of enlightenment? And you'll find them becoming evasive every time because there's no answer to that, because that's not how it works. Okay. So Abhinavagupta rightly says all the yogic practices, the deity yoga, the visualizations, the working with chakras, all of that, that is vikalpa samskara, that is refining your understanding. It's just that people, especially modern Westerners, think that refining your understanding has to do with a process of thinking better. And it doesn't. Refining your understanding happens through either seeing that the mental constructs you're clinging to are inadequate and replacing them with better and subtler mental constructs, or through an imaginal rewriting of the software code in your brain. So these yogic practices, especially deity yoga, is a rewriting of the software code in your brain that takes place in an imaginal space. By imaginal, I mean that you're using the power of imagination uh, uh, to your benefit. And Abhinavagupta says so explicitly. I'm not saying some modern analysis. He says that it's through the imagination that we're doing this. How and why? Because the imagination is usually directed towards activities that cause suffering. That is to say, we imagine possible futures and we agonize about them if they seem negative, or we imagine possible positive futures and we grasp after them, feel that attachment, right, or craving, or we imagine what we've done in the past. All remembering is imagining, by the way, and we feel terrible about it. Or we imagine what great moments in the past and we get lost in that reverie, right? So, and we get attached to the past, which disallows our fulfillment in the present. So, in 4 different ways, we use the imagination to cause ourselves more suffering. And Abhinavagupta says here in this yogic practice and deity practice, we are using the imagination in a potentially liberating way. So what's at the heart of deity practice? That you learn to visualize the deity and sense the deity as vividly as possible. And then you ultimately, in the culmination of the practice, you visualize yourself as the deity. Right? So first you learn how to visualize that in some versions of deity practice, it's literally a download because you visualize the deity above your head in a lot of detail. And then when the time is right, you download, the deity's light body comes down and encompasses yours. And then you start to experience, hopefully, that your own flesh and blood is the deity's light body in form. It is the light made flesh, right? So in other words, you are seeking to overwrite your self-concepts with a vision of what you are that more closely corresponds to reality. And again, Abhinavagupta says that. Okay, he doesn't use the metaphor of software code, of course, because that's modern, but he says this explicitly. He says, this is why we do deha shuddhi, right? We burn away the body image, we burn away the self images in imagination, so that then we can install the image of the deity in their place. And why do any of that? Vikalpa samskara. It's nothing but a refining of your understanding so that your self-concept approaches more closely the nature of reality. If you visualize yourself as the deity in their glorious body of light, with all their powers and attributes, why do these deities hold instruments and weapons and things, right? A goad and a noose and a trident and things. These represent their capacities, their potencies, their powers, and you're supposed to come to understand that you have those same powers and potencies. Not you, not the you think you are, not the limited personality self, but the you that you actually are, consciousness unbound, inherently has those potentialities and powers, inherently has those potencies, right? So the consciousness or awareness or presence, call it what you will, or self that you actually are, is already fully equipped with the capacity to experience bliss in any context, regardless of conditions, unconditional joy or contentment, ananda shakti, right? That which you actually are already has the power to be aware of whatever needs awareness, already has the power to express whatever needs expression, to engage with whatever needs engagement, right? Ichajnana kriya shaktis, right? Already has. So this visualization of self as deity also has a danger. The danger is that it's taken as an exaltation of the ego. The self I think I am is now getting exalted, is getting deified. The worst thing that could possibly happen on this path would be a deification of the ego. And that causes great harm. And this is why Tantra is said to be the dangerous path. The faster, more effective, yet dangerous path. How many gurus have we seen, right, who ended up in this state of in a deification of their ego? Right? They might have glimpsed reality, they might have sensed what they are, but there's still a shred of ego left, and then that gets exalted and expanded until it's dangerous. Okay, so but the caveat in place when when you get educated on the potential danger, then it poses less of a danger. Much less, right? Because you're on the lookout for it. You see the difference between the exaltation of the ego and the experience of yourself as the deity, which is paradoxically humbling. When you experience yourself as the deity, it's humbling because um, the person you thought you were is nothing but a thought. And you are humbled out of this constructed fictitious identity and into this raw, pure presence that the deity image represents. Okay? So, now the point is, Abhinavagupta says, none of the practices of yoga are helpful unless they contribute to discernment and or refinement of understanding. Those are highly overlapping terms in our little Venn diagram, right? Those are overlapping terms, but also have some distinction. So no practice of yoga is helpful unless it contributes to discernment and or refinement of understanding. Okay? So somebody might think, oh, well, okay. Well, that leaves out all of modern yoga, which is all about physical postures and stuff. No, 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 it doesn't. Because doing the physical postures of modern yoga can contribute to discernment. How? If you are practicing discernment between your body image and your self-concept on the one hand, and um, the the visceral direct experience of embodiment on the other, which is always already free from judgments. Okay? So in other words, doing the physical poses of yoga is contributing to your awakening if it constitutes an exercise in discernment, where you're practicing seeing the difference between, on the one hand, your self-concept and body image, and the visceral experience of embodiment, which is always already free of all the mind's judgments. Then it's incredibly helpful. Okay? But of course, this is a fascinating analysis, because we cannot say to anyone, oh, that practice is invalid and this one is valid. We can't say that to anyone, because it's all about how are you doing the practice, with what understanding, with what goal, right? So you can't say which practices could contribute and which couldn't for someone else. You can only say for yourself. And you ask this question: does this practice contribute to discernment and or refinement of understanding? If so, it's a worthy practice. It's an effective practice, potentially, right? But Abhinavagupta points out all yogic practices can only be an indirect means. They can be an indirect means to liberation, not a direct means. Okay, liberation is clear seeing. That's the only direct means. Is clear seeing brings clear seeing, right? So looking to see what is prior to your thought about it, prior to your interpretation of it, that's a direct means. But the issue with that is it either works or it doesn't in any given moment. And you can't really know how well it's working because of the power of delusion. In other words, you think you're experiencing what is prior to thought or interpretation, and there's still a subtle interpretation. You think you're experiencing the body viscerally, and yet there's still a subtle body image in place. So you just have to keep going with it. You just have to keep looking. And when you arrive at the true clear seeing, how do you know? You know because no doubt is possible. Now, notice, this is a very important point. When I say no doubt is possible, I don't mean you believe something so fervently that you couldn't doubt it. No, no, no. That's the opposite of this. That's danger zone. Okay. Um, if you doubt something thoroughly or believe something fervently, that's the same thing. It's the same mind operation, just two sides of the same coin. Doubt and belief are two sides of the same coin in the most literal sense of that analogy possible. No, the clear seeing is self-validating without any insistence, without any mental conceptualization. It's just a quiet, calm, clear seeing that is thoroughly self-validating. There's a knowing this is it, without the thought that this is it. Okay. And there's no doubt possible and no belief needed in clear seeing. Okay. So the only direct means, to summarize, the only direct means is the practice of looking to see what is prior to any thought or interpretation. And the indirect means are many, and they must be many because there's many different constitutions, many different body-mind types. Okay? So engage whatever indirect means works, and indirect means are valuable. They're valuable, and they're also somewhere to put your energy when you are longing for liberation, you are longing for awakening, and it is a fire in your heart, and you need somewhere to put that energy, because the thing with looking in your direct experience is um, do it, absolutely do it every day. Look into your direct experience every single day, but it clicks or it doesn't click immediately, or it clicks to whatever degree that it clicks immediately. Looking into your direct experience, uh, if it's going to reveal the truth today, or some facet of the truth, it's going to be more or less immediate. And by immediate, I mean, after the mind calms down, after you get all settled and you're ready to truly look. I don't mean that as soon as the teacher says, look, it instantly happens or it doesn't. No, no, no. I mean, the teacher invites you to look, you settle down the mind, you settle down the body, you get settled, and then you're ready to look, and you look, and there's a click or there's not. And the click could, the seeing can go to some extent or to a further extent. I don't need to get into that right now. Okay, so this is how the spiritual path works. Like, this is how the awakening process works. And it's true for anyone. So Abhinavagupta was making an argument that applies to all practitioners through all time and space, right? And ultimately you could decide, well, I think that's wrong. But on what basis could you possibly decide that? Because you can't know what really works and doesn't, and how things work until you're looking from the perspective of awakeness, Otherwise, it's just mere speculation. You're just saying, oh, I like the sound of this more than that. But you have no idea. It's just the mind. Okay. So that's the incredible revelation that this tradition has to offer to the spiritual paths of all the world. And other masters and other traditions, by the way, do echo this exact teaching in their own words, right? But Abhinavagupta was almost unique in saying it so precisely. Here's exactly how it works, and now you there's no confusion. You can go and do it, right? So there's a little bit more to it. There's a little bit there's other little subtle elements, but we don't need to try to cover all the elements right now. But they're all just kind of little footnotes or caveats on what's already been said. What I've already said is the whole thing, but for some certain persons, some of the footnotes, as it were, become important for that person because they help eliminate misunderstanding. But we don't have time to get to all of them right now. But that's part of what I'm doing in my teaching. That's part of what any legitimate teacher is doing, is they're just talking about how this works and offering this and that footnote and caveat to make sure they try to cover all the ground of all the students, so that everybody has the opportunity. Okay, so there's no such thing as a constitution which constitutes a real barrier to awakening. You might think some people think otherwise. It's pure confusion and delusion. There's no such thing as being so traumatized that you couldn't awaken to your true nature. There's no such thing as having a body mind which constitutes a real barrier to this process. However, you might have a body mind that has different needs in this process. needs to hear different caveats and different elaborations of the fundamental teaching. Okay. So, yeah, there's no physical condition that's a bar. There's no mental condition. There's no mental illness that constitutes a bar, right? And here I'm talking to you. I'm not speaking about hypothetical third person. Don't say, please, oh, what about this person over there who's got this condition? No, I'm talking to you because you're here interested in awakening. And if you're interested in awakening, there is no bar. There's nothing that could stop it. The process might take longer than you thought. The process might indeed not have even started, but you so badly want to believe that it started that you consider yourself in the process of awakening. You can't really know for sure until you do. So I want to address that for a moment. The vast majority of what people are doing is when it comes to spirituality of any kind, the vast majority of what people are doing is from the point of view of the actual process just a hobby. People are engaged in a hobby, and sometimes the hobby becomes their livelihood. So what do I mean by hobby? I mean that you enjoy learning about something or playing around with, so like you study philosophy, that's a hobby, unless you happen to read something in a philosophical text that completely changes your life and impacts you in such a way that the impact remains even when you're not thinking about it indefinitely. Well, then that's awakening under another name, right? But most people, right? They whether they're interested in history or philosophy, it's the same. Whether they're interested in politics, it's the same. It's just their hobby. It's what they do with their mind. The mind is demanding. The mind is voracious. It wants to be given something to do, and it wants to think that it's important. It's important that I'm informed about current events in the world, so I read the news. No, this is just your pretext, your excuse for feeding the voracious mind that demands to be given information, right? Now, then you might then turn to spirituality. Oh, that seems more important than politics. Okay, I'm going to read all the spiritual books. I'm going to learn all the stuff. You're just giving your mind something to do. It's nothing to do with awakening, okay? So again, the confusion comes because if you start believing the spiritual teachings, that produces a byproduct of a pleasurable feeling, and then that can be mistaken for evidence of awakening. Okay. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with hobbies. There's nothing wrong with the spiritual hobby, for God's sake. I'm not saying those people doing that are wrong and invalid. No, 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 no. It's just that you have to understand the difference here. And because if you're interested in awakening, the difference is incredibly important. If you're interested in awakening, what's the number one quality you need? It's vigilance. The number one quality, without a doubt. It's vigilance. What kind of vigilance? That you keep vigilantly paying attention to the difference between being with direct experience, looking into direct experience, and suddenly getting lost in the mind world, getting pulled into the mind world. Okay, again, there's nothing wrong with being in the mind world, but if you want time spent in the mind world to be helpful on your spiritual journey, it needs to be of the type I outlined earlier. You're refining understandings. You're not building new structures of understanding, as it were. You're not installing new beliefs. That's what most people do at first, right? They read Tantra Illuminated or whatever. I like these beliefs. I'm going to put them on the hard drive of my brain in a special place, right? No, it's not installing new beliefs. It's allowing the spiritual teachings to help dissolve those belief structures that are not aligned with reality and improve the ones that are already partially aligned with reality. Okay. So that's why, as one of my teachers said, the spiritual teachings function like an acid bath to your ossified belief structures. Okay. So that's be careful that you are paying attention to what's going on. You're not building new belief structures on the basis of the teachings. You're dissolving ones that are not aligned and refining ones that are partially aligned, and they can never be perfectly aligned, right? But then you are contributing to your awakening, to contributing to the possibility of your full awakening. You're making it more and more and more and more likely. That matters. Okay. What this full awakening thing is just a phrase. Don't worry about the phrase, right? It means inhabiting your true nature fully. And why would that be so important? Well, there could hardly be anything more important, because if you inhabit your true nature fully, it will solve all your problems, right? Well, more accurately, it will dissolve the state in which problems are seen to exist, which experientially amounts to the same thing, thankfully, right? It dissolves the state in which problems are seen to exist. It is the end of all mind-created suffering, and that turns out to be 99% of your suffering. That's a big revelation, by the way, because you'd think a lot of my suffering is caused by the world doing shit to me. Karma. My suffering's caused by karma. Nope. Turns out 99% of it is mind created, because it's in your reaction to what happens to you. It's not in what happens to you, right? So it is possible to be free from suffering. Uh, and so this is part of why this goal of fully inhabiting your true nature is indeed not only desirable, but Abhinavagupta says the only thing worth desiring, that which is ultimately to be sought, he says. The only thing ultimately to be sought. Right? And again, it's just a figure of speech, because yes, you are seeking that which you already are. Isn't that an irony? Of course, it's all incredibly ironic, because the universe has the best sense of humor ever. And that's part of why when people awaken, one of the most common sort of physiological byproducts of awakening is just laughter, sometimes uncontrollable laughter, right? Moment depending on how and what and how the moment of clear seeing arises or arrives, there can just be so much laughter. Okay, so um if you're trying to figure something out, you're just spinning your wheels in the mind world. Okay, I'm talking from the standpoint of the spiritual path, right? Because if you're trying to figure something out and involving, systems at work or problem solving, engineering questions, well, of course, that's how it works. You use the mind to figure it out, right? But from the standpoint of the spiritual path, if you're trying to figure something out, you're just spinning your wheels in the mind world. There's no point. Stop doing it. Look deeper in your direct experience. There's nothing to figure out. There's nothing you need to understand about your direct experience. You need to look deeper into it, and understanding will spontaneously arise of its own accord if it's needed. And often it's not. Okay. So vigilance, remember, number one quality needed is vigilance, because you sit quietly and look deeper into your own experience. You will find attention yanked back into the mind world 1,000 times. It's the easiest thing to do or have done, right? Because it's the habitual place. It's the most habitual place to be in the mind world, interpreting, trying to understand, right? So
sometimes people sitting in meditation or sitting in practice, whatever we're calling it, awareness cultivation, they have extraordinary experiences. They have energetic experiences. They have what people call kundalini experiences. They have openings. They have all this stuff. And then they come to the teacher and says, this is what happened to me. What does it mean? That's mind world. What do I need to understand about this experience? The answer is always the same. Nothing. Nothing. You do not need to understand anything about your extraordinary experience. And if you try to build an understanding, you're just going deeper into the mind world. It's not going to help. You will never find truth by referencing thoughts. You will never find truth by referencing thoughts, ever, ever, ever. So why is that so important to stress? Because you compulsively look to thought to find truth about anything. And by the way, this part applies not just on the spiritual path, but it applies everywhere. You want to know the truth about your relationships? You're not going to find it in thought. Okay. Okay, maybe not everywhere, because if you're trying to solve a problem with computer code and you're a computer coder, you're going to need to think through the problem. Absolutely, that's the case. Okay. But I mean, any reality which doesn't have its origin in human thought cannot be understood through thought. And the dynamics of human relationships, much of them anyway, is there prior to thought. And then we're bringing thought to try to interpret and understand them, right? Now, if you work with a therapist to understand your relationships better, oh, that seemed to really help. How did it help, though? Because most of us have the kind of mind where we need to think we understand in order to forgive, in order to let go, in order to relax. I guarantee you, look at your own experience, you'll see it's true. In every case where understanding something helped, I say you didn't understand anything. You just came to a thought that allowed you to forgive, allowed you to let go, allowed you to relax. But what if you didn't need thoughts to do that? What if you just saw the value in those movements of the heart and no longer needed them justified by thought? Isn't that a better situation? Because if you need them justified by thought, you have to go to therapy for years and years, and you have to understand everything, and because only when you understand someone can you forgive them. Only when you think you understand yourself, when you've diagnosed yourself, then you can accept yourself. Okay, so do it if you need to, but you're not going to find the truth of anything that's fundamentally non-conceptual in thought. And life is non-conceptual, embodiment is non-conceptual, relationships are fundamentally non-conceptual. That's why you don't have to understand someone to love them. That's why you don't have to be understood to let love in. Okay. Remember, please, that in any practice, you've got to be vigilant about going into thought. So when Abhinavagupta teaches the visualization of the deity, for example, or when the lineage teaches that, they're not teaching to think about it. They're teaching you to use your mind in a more direct way. You're still using the mind, of course, if you're visualizing, right? And doing the practice, doing the technique. Of course, you're using the mind, but you're not using it to build discursive concepts. You're using it in a somewhat more direct way, which itself is still an indirect means to liberation, of course.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, you can always find out more about the tradition of Nondual Shaiva Tantra at tantrailluminated.org, where, if you wish, you can become a subscriber to our online learning portal, and you'll receive access to a vast number of recordings, including a comprehensive curriculum in tantric philosophy, tantric yoga, guided meditation, and much, much more. Music for the podcast composed and recorded by Ann Leader. Find her at annleader.com. Podcast produced by Grazia Tribulato. New episodes drop every week, and may all beings benefit.